Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and welcome to Cheap Shots, the ultimate series for miniature wargamers who want stunning tabletop quality miniatures without breaking the bank. In this series, we'll show you how to save money on your miniatures painting hobby by using affordable craft paints, budget-friendly tools, and clever techniques. So whether you're a beginner or a seasoned hobbyist, you'll learn how to achieve incredible results without the premium price tag. And on today's video, we're going to show you guys how to paint up a squad of Flagellants for your games of Warhammer the Old World, especially for the Empire of Man. Now, Flagellants, of course, are a great, rare choice unit for a lot of Warhammer players. They got a lot of frenzy, a lot of doomsday type prophetizers. Basically, they just kind of go around and try to redeem themselves for the doom and destruction that's coming their way. Now, I'm going to warn you guys now, these miniatures are a little bit different than what you normally see for a Flagellants army for Warhammer the Old World. And the reason why is because I'm painting up this squad to be used in games of Mordheim as part of our Witch Hunters warband. But with that being said though, as you can see, these miniatures have a beautiful tabletop standard, and when you compare the prices with our cheapskate total of $29.82 and compare that from the shopping list that you get from Army Painter Citadel at $189.40, will bring your miniatures to a beautiful tabletop standard with a total savings of $159.58. So that being said, let's go and talk about how to paint up a squad of Flagellants for your games of Warhammer or Mordheim. So the very first thing you have to do, of course, is to assemble your miniatures. You can assemble your miniatures any way that you want to for your preferences. Like I said before, we're actually using this unit of Flagellants for a squad of Witch Hunters for our games of Mordheim. So we just kind of assemble these guys to make them look kind of cool. We're not really going for the most optimal look for these guys in terms of build or weapons or equipment for gaming. We're just kind of doing it to make it like the rule of cool because we want to make our warband look really impressive. Now once you're done, of course, assembling your miniatures, next thing you gotta do, of course, is add some texturing to the bases of the miniatures. Now my favorite method of actually for adding texture to my bases is to paint the bases with wood glue that I have just kind of lying around the house, and I dust it with some sand that I get from my backyard garden. I let that dry directly onto the base, and then what I do is I apply a slurry mixture, which is a 50-50 mixture of both wood glue as well as water. You make it to a 50-50 mixture, it mixed almost to the consistency of milk, is what you're kind of looking for, and you apply it like a wash all over the entirety of the texture on the base, so that when it dries, it creates an airtight seal so the texture doesn't come flicking off the bases. And once you're done with that method, we move on to priming. So we're going to use a flat white primer for our miniatures. We're going to use Rust-Oleum's flat white primer. You get this at your local Walmart. And the reason why you do priming on your miniatures is because it does a couple of things for you. The first thing it actually does is it creates a surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to. If you were to just apply your acrylic paints directly onto bare plastic, the slightest bit of friction would cause the paint to rub off your miniature, which would of course ruin the overall finish. So that's when you want to use primer to do that. Now priming actually does have a large impact on the vibrancy of the colors that you put directly onto your miniatures. Traditionally speaking, the darker the primer, the more this would do the paint job, but because we're doing an oil wash with these miniatures, which is going to use a wood stain that's going to darken out the value of the colors, we're going to go the flat white primer so that way the colors remain more vibrant. So the very first detail we're going to paint is on the flesh that's exposed on these fighters, and there's actually quite a bit of these the flesh being exposed. A lot of these guys' torsos as well as their arms and their faces are fully unarmored and unclothed, just to add to the desperate as well as frenzied look of these characters. So I wanted to create a variety of skin tones for these characters. So for two of the fighters, I actually based their flesh in two thin layers of nutmeg brown. For three of the fighters, I did 2 coats of burnt umber by apple barrel paint, and then for the remaining 5, I did a normal flesh color by an apple barrel paint as well. You can get these colors at your local Walmart, and you just put 2 thin coats directly on all the exposed flesh on these miniatures. You don't need to be particularly neat at this stage, because if you do have any spillover, it's perfectly fine, because we'll be adding more colors to these miniatures later on, and we can cover up any mistakes that you might have made. So now that we have a good solid base coat for the flesh, the next thing we gotta do, of course, is to dry brush the miniatures. And dry brushing is a neat little technique to use in order to create the illusion of depth on your miniatures. What ends up happening when you dry brush your miniatures, the pigment of the paint actually adhere to the raised surface of the miniature, while the darker color stays in the recesses. So this creates highlights as well as the illusion of depth for your miniatures. So the fighters that we did in Burnt Umber earlier, we actually dry brushed their flesh tones with their flesh in Territorial Beige with Apple Barrel paint. For the ones that we did in Nutmeg Brown, we're going to dry brush them with Flesh by Apple Barrel paint. And for the 5 that we did in Flesh, we're going to brush them with Delta Serencoats Peaches and Cream. As you can see, it creates the illusion of depth on these miniatures because now it's raised on the raised surfaces of their musculature while leaving that dark color in the recesses of their bodies as well. Now, it does have a chalky kind of pastel appearance when you do dry brushing, but don't worry, when we get to the oil washing stage, the oil washing stage will smooth out those transitions and take away that chalky appearance. So next, we're going to work on these characters real quick are on their trousers, because there's quite a bit of these characters, as well as their tops of their clothing they're wearing as well. And I got a little lazy on this one. I decided to use 2 colors really for their clothing, for both their trousers as well as their tops. And those 2 colors, of course, were Moccasin Brown by Anita's Acrylic. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby, and the other one was Pewter Gray by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart as well. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted something that would contrast nicely with the flesh that we already did earlier, and at the same time have something that's kind of neat looking as well as kind of drab and kind of faded to represent the fact that these guys have been kind of wandering around aimlessly for a long period of time. So we just put that directly onto their clothing. Now, the next detail we're going to focus on real quick is on the torches that these characters have. Actually, 3 of these characters are carrying torches, while another guy has like a fire basket on top of his head, and we're going to use some glazing in order to make these look really cool. So what we're going to do real quick is we're going to make this flame effect. We're going to paint the tips of the flame in bright red by Anita's True Red. You can get it at your local Hobby Lobby. We're just going to put 2 thin coats directly onto the tops of the flames to kind of create that burning kind of glowing effect going on with the fire that they're carrying. Now, the next thing we're going to do real quick is we're going to do 2 things. The first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to paint the actual kind of midsection of the flames, this Tropic Orange by Apple Barrel Paint. The reason why I'm using Tropical Orange and not normal orange is because we're going to do a glaze with yellow over the entirety of the flame to make it look like it's kind of one cohesive unit. So I did some little bit of painting down the bottom, and then I also did some dry brushing with the red flames that we did earlier to just create some illusion of depth, as well as to show those individual tongues of flame to be represented on those torches. And the very last step, of course, is that we did a glaze. What I did is I took King's Gold by Apple Barrel Paint. I made a 50-50 mixture of that paint with water until it became like a very watery kind of wash. And then I applied it like a glaze directly over the entirety of the flames. And I did the red parts, the orange parts, as well as the parts that I had not done painting yet. Now, glazing, of course, is a slow process where you take watered down paint and you apply it in small layers directly onto this. What this allows it to do is it allows the base color that you have down below to kind of bleed through the layers of glazing, so that kind of looks like it's all one cohesive color, and it kind of creates this kind of interesting kind of flaming effect. Now, it's good, I'm going to warn you, glazing takes a while because what you have to do is you have to apply a thin layer of this wash basically on top of the flames. You have to wait for it to dry completely and then apply another layer, wait for it to dry completely, and rinse and repeat. So you got to do that for basically 4 coats, what I had to do for these flames. But as you can see, though, it creates a really beautiful flame design on these miniatures. So now that we're done with the flames, the next thing we're going to do real quick is we're going to paint the hair of these miniatures as well. For 3 of these fighters, I painted with 2 thin coats of Ivory by Apple Barrel Paint to kind of give them this kind of pale blonde look to them. For 2 of these guys, I did Ripe Tomato by Apple Barrel Paint to kind of make them have like this gingery orange, gingery red type of hair. For the guy with the flame on top of his head, I used Pale Gray to pick out the details of his beard. I did 1 fighter with his hair done in Territorial Beige, and I did 1 last remaining fighter with King's Gold as well. This way it kind of creates some color interest for all the fighters that we have. And now that we're done with the hair, the next thing we're going to focus on now are on the type of the shirts these characters are wearing as well. So we painted the pants and the trousers in both Moccasin Brown as well as Pewter Gray before, but to add some little color variety to these guys, I basically broke them down into 5 different groups. I painted their details a little bit differently. So for 2 of the fighters, I painted their arm wraps as well as their tunics in bright blue by Apple Barrel Paint. For 2 more, I painted the shirt for the guy in the front as well as the wraps around the wrist of the guy in the back there with Marsh Green by Applebarrel paint. For 2 of these guys, I painted their tops with Nita's True Acrylic and True Red. And then of course for 2 of these guys, I did King's Gold. And for the last 2 guys at the end, I use Khaki by Applebarrel paint as well. This kind of creates a variety of different colors that makes this unit kind of stand out, but at the same time, kind of goes with the overall weathered look of these guys are going with. And to give that weathered look, we're going to dry brush the entirety of these miniatures, minus the flames of course, with Pale Gray by Folk Art. What this does of course is that it makes all the clothing look a little bit more faded, a little bit more worn, like it's been out in the elements for a long period of time and hasn't been well maintained. We're going to dry brush the trousers, we're going to dry brush the shirts, we're also going to dry brush the hair of these characters all at once. Now you might be thinking, well, Commander Cheapskate, why are you just doing this one pale gray over everything? And to be perfectly honest, it's because I was feeling kind of lazy and it still achieves the exact same result that we want. And that's the reason why I did. I just used one color to do it all. So now that we're done with all of the clothing that we just did earlier, now we're going to work on the metal elements of these fighters as well. So the things we're going to be focused on, for example, are things like the weapons these guys are carrying. So as you could probably see from a lot of the metallic weapons these guys are using, we're using Gunmetal Gray by Folk Art. You can get at your local Walmart. It's a beautiful gunmetal color. We're painting all the parts that we want silver to have that gunmetal gray. So things like the bindings of the little head rack that fighter in the back is on, the chains and the weights of the flails, the blades of the weapons, pieces of armor these guys are carrying, the head of maces, the blades of the scythe, the cages of the flame cage, that sort of thing. We're also using copper too as an accent color for some of these weapons as well. For example, like the bell ringer, we're using that for his bell, for example. And with that, the painting of our miniatures is actually done. The next thing we're going to do now is start working on the bases, because I'm going to do an all-over oil wash, and I want that oil wash to seep into the base as well. So I'm going to paint the base first before we do the oil washing. Now, to have these guys match up with the witch hunters that I plan on using for this warband, I painted their bases in 2 thin layers of Tuscan teal. I get this at my local Walmart. As you can see, it has like this nice teal color that these guys are standing on. That way it makes it look like they're standing on masonry, ruining, and that sort of thing. Afterwards, I dry brush the texturing of the bases with some Dutch Aqua by Folk Art. I had to get this at your local Walmart as well. Just do a quick dry brushing to capture the highlights of the bases to show off that texturing. And the last thing we're going to do, of course, is an oil wash. So because we're using a quick paint method, we're going to use an oil wash in order to cover these miniatures, allow it to actually seep into the recesses. And we're going to use mid-wax polyshade acrylic in Mission Oak. It's a cheaper alternative to Army Painter Strong Tone. Army Painter Strong Tone is a waterproof product that does as advertised. The only problem though is that it costs $32 a can, when a can of mid-wax polyshade acrylic in Mission Oak will do exactly the same thing for $7.99 at your local Walmart. What I do is I just apply it like a wash all over the entirety of the miniature and allow it to dry. Now this oil washing does a couple of things. The first thing that it does, of course, that it seeps directly into the recesses of the miniature and brings out a lot of those details that we couldn't see before. Things like the individual folds of the fabric, the spaces between the musculature, the texturing on the bases, etc. The second thing it also does too is it also smooths out the transitions between our dry brushing and our base coating. As you can see, that pastel kind of chalky appearance is now removed because the oil wash has blended those coats together and actually makes that smooth transition. The very last thing that oil washing also does too is it darkens down the vibrancy of the color that we use. That's the reason why we use such bright colors in the base coating and the dry brushing phase, because the oil washing was going to darken those values and make it look more realistic. Now you do have to wait for this stuff to dry and cure for 24 hours because there is a polyurethane inside of it. It's going to give you a nice high gloss finish for these miniatures that's going to also protect them from fading and chipping. And once you're done, you can move on to the rest of the work. Now this step of course is completely optional, but you can do a matte varnish spray over your miniatures. That way you can take away that high gloss sheen and have more of a matte finish. Like I said before, it is kind of optional. I like to use Krylon matte varnish spray from Walmart in order to do this step, and then I get a nice little matte finish. And now we can work on the rimming of the bases. So for the bases, we're going to rim this in 2 thin layers of Skyline by Folk Art. It's a nice sky blue color that I get in my local Walmart. I use this color for all of the Necromunda as well as Mordheim warbands that we have in the Studios collection to kind of give it look like this kind of urban look, because both of them primarily take place in cities, and that's the reason why I use this kind of color to represent that. And this, of course, is the end result that we talked about earlier with your miniatures. So now that we're done talking about exactly how we painted them so cheaply, let's talk about the materials that you need to buy for Army Painter as well as Citadel if you want to achieve the exact same results we did, but using those name brand paints instead. So these are the materials you need to buy from both Citadel as well as Army Painter if you want to achieve the exact same results we did, but using their name brand paints instead. You'll need to buy a can of Koroks White Spray for $17, as well as Thunderhawk Blue, Averland Sunset, Longbeard Gray, Teclis Blue, Caliban Green, Luganeth Orange, as well as Bugman's Glow, Cadian Flesh Tone, Morghast Bone, Baylor Brown, Slanesh Gray, Troll Slayer Orange, Flayed One Flesh, Mephiston Red, XV88 and Rakarth Flesh, Rust Gray, and Ulthuan Gray, and all those colors would cost you $4.55 per pot. You also need to buy a bottle of Wildwood, as well as Leadbelcher Screaming Bell, as well as Aethermatic Blue, and Astral Granite for the texturing, and all that's going to cost you $7.80 for those colors. You also need to buy a can of Amy Pretty Strong Tone in order to paint your miniatures at $32 a can, as well as a can of Munitarian Varnish if you wanted to achieve that matte finish. Now, assuming that you're purchasing everything from Citadel as well as Army Painter for the very first time, you're talking about a grand total investment of $189.40 to paint up your miniatures using these materials. Now, if you use our cheapskate total, which is only $29.82, and you subtract the two, we end up saving you $159.58. So there you guys have it. In conclusion, if you're looking for a way to save money on your wargaming hobby, may I suggest you switch to cheaper craft paints. You get a similar result at a fraction of the price, and it brings your miniatures to a beautiful tabletop standard. So that's good for this week, guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. I am Kevin out of Cheapskate. I will see you guys on the next one. Peace out and stay classy.